Good afternoon. It's really weird being here because the last time I was in this room was about 35 years ago and I was getting a degree. The whole ceremony, some of you will know this, is actually in Latin, and I understand they still do that today. So the parody video was far more interesting in 2 minutes than the 2 hours of Latin we had to put up. You'll be very pleased to know I'm actually speaking in English today. So, talking about good business. So, in 2014, I had to make 3 very difficult phone calls to my 3 children. We were just about to go on the holiday of a lifetime, Route 66. Anyone done Route 66? Yeah, a few of you at the back. And I was ringing them 3 or 4 days before we left to say, sorry, the holiday's cancelled. The reason was the business that I'd spent 15 years growing. At that point, we were about 10 million turnover, 50 people, was on the edge of collapse. It was a horrible, horrible time. I won't go into the details, we haven't got time, but we put in a new IT system which had gone horribly wrong, had loads of stock in the warehouse. Yes. Be prepared, be prepared. The reason was, I'm sure isn't the case here, I didn't have good enough people doing it, so I'm sure that's not the case. So, yeah. We'll find out in January, eh? So, yeah, I mean, the business was on the edge of going under. As you can imagine, it was gut-wrenching, horrible. I was working 22 hours a day, probably completely uselessly, to be honest, running around like a headless chicken. How had we got in such a mess? Well, looking back on it, it was entirely my fault. I hadn't been clear enough on my purpose as an individual. I hadn't been clear enough on the purpose as a company. And to be honest with you, my ego was too tied up in my identity as a CEO. My position rather than who I was. And we'll talk about those 3 things as we carry on. In some ways, it shouldn't have gone that badly wrong because terrible lighting here, isn't it? You can hardly see that. But the business started off in 1999 with a good aim. I started with a business partner. We'd both come from the charitable sector. And we wanted genuinely to make our business do some good in the world. Because we both worked in the charity sector, we'd seen the mess in the world. And in effect, charities only mop up mess. They're sticking plasters. If we're going to see change in the world, it is business that needs to get its act together, as well as a bit of decent legislation as well. Come on to that later. But we genuinely our hearts were in the right place. Of our first 5 employees, we took 3 people who other people would say were unemployable. We had a guy just come out of prison, a recovering drug addict, and a recovering alcoholic. All both clean, obviously. One of them was a van driver, so I hope he was. And yeah, good start. The DNA was there. Unfortunately, my business partner left after a couple of years, and then I was just kind of stuck. I was living in the wrong part of the country, for one, and I was only focused really on making this business succeed. I'd lost our reason for being. I'd lost our purpose at that point. I should have had a clue. Quite a few years later, in 2011, I went to a project in Kenya. At that point, we had turned the corner. We were profitable. We were the leading wholesaler of specialty food in the UK, supplying lots of farm shops and delis. All those nice food shops you go to, we're supplying them, most likely, 90% of them anyway. In 2011, I went to Kenya because we wanted to, I hate the phrase, give something back, but yeah, maybe don't take it in the first place, I would probably say. But we wanted to do some good in the world, and we wrote to a few food charities. Can we help you? Can we send teams? No, they weren't interested. They are these days, actually, but back then they weren't. And I knew of this project in Kenya, went there with my daughter, and I thought, yes, we can make a real difference here. Came back to the office. Of course, everyone was really excited to hear what had happened. Could we help? And honestly, every time I tried to talk about it, I started crying. Probably not a good look for a CEO, but actually I don't care these days. At the time, embarrassing. I cry quite a lot these days, and it's fine, actually, by the way, to cry at work. But it was noticeable, I mean, some of this is from hindsight, but it was noticeable that people were really, really pleased that we were doing something good in the world. We weren't just about selling food and drink to rich people, let's face it. It's mainly rich people that shop at farm shops. But we were starting to make a difference. We ran a ball, and over the years, we've raised over £250,000 for this place. I've been there 10 times. I've taken teams. It's been really good. I didn't really twig quick enough that people were coming to work with a slightly better spring in their step, knowing that the company they worked for was doing some good. My ears should have pricked up more, and we should have changed how we did stuff a lot earlier. So back to the Route 66. I did actually go on that holiday because my fellow directors basically wanted me to get out. I was being next to useless, running around looking stressed. So we went on the holiday. Interestingly, within my first hour of coming back after 2.5 weeks away, I saw the thing we need to change on the system. And from that point, we started to recover, and we still have the business today. Probably wouldn't have seen it if we hadn't gone away, but that's another talk. Around that time, I discovered B Corp. Who has heard of B Corp in the room? Okay, about 40%. I thought it was a bit of a strange name, so a friend of mine introduced me to it. You probably heard of the brand Cooke, the frozen food company. Ed's a friend of mine who founded that. He told me about B Corp. I thought, slightly American-sounding, Ed. Can we have something a bit more British, maybe? Anyway, looked into it, and everything I believed about business was in this organization. Here were a load of people. They wanted to do good for people. They wanted to do good for the planet. And at the same time, they were really, really successful businesses. They weren't just doing good. They were successful financially, too. It was everything I believed business should be was manifest in these companies, mainly in the USA at the time. So we became one of the first UK B Corps in 2015. We haven't got time to go into it, but basically it's a way of measuring how good businesses are for the world in these 5 key areas: governance, workers, community, environment, and customers. How good are you? What positive difference is this company making in the world? And it's a fantastic tool. We produce an impact report, as I'm sure you do, and this is one of my favorite moments of the year when this lands on my desk. And it's about, I think, 24 or 28 pages of stuff that we've done over the last year, difference that we've made. Small, albeit small. We're still a relatively small business, about 30 million. But we are making a difference, and people who work for us are really, really pleased that they're part of a company that's doing some good in the world. It gives them a reason to come to work. Previously, when the company went horribly wrong, people were really just coming to work to earn enough to pay their mortgage or rent. How much better is it people can come to work when they know not only are they doing their job, but they're also making a difference? It adds a completely different dimension to the company. And the great thing about this now is that in the early days of doing this, it was mainly initiated by me. But a few years down the line, a lot of the stuff that is in the impact report is what other people's initiatives. I've got a great idea. Let's raise some money for this, or let's volunteer over here, or let's find this way of reducing our carbon footprint. And that's fantastic. A lot of companies do impact report these days. It's become slightly trendy. Some corporates are jumping on the bandwagon, and how deep it goes, I don't know. But it's good that the world is moving. However, it's not just about the outer. It's got to be about the inner. So I wrote this first book, Forces for Good, I think in 2018. I wrote the book, came out in 2019. And as I was writing the book, which was basically in 3 sections, how to be good for people, how to be good for planet, and actually, if you do that, it's good for profit too. That's the foundation of my business philosophy. Put people and planet first, and the profits follow, which I strongly believe in, and it's true for us, and it's true for many other companies I know. However, as I was writing the book, I realized that it wasn't just about the outer, it was about the inner. And I needed to change if I was going to change the world. There's a famous quote from Rumi that says, "Yesterday I was clever, I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, and I'm changing myself." If we're really going to make a difference in the world, great, do all the good stuff, but to do it well and to do it lastingly and sustainably, we need to change ourselves. So very briefly, we'll just go through how we need to change. It's really in 3 ways. Connection, it's all about connection, and I think this couple of days for you is about connection. It's about connecting with people, first of all. You see, we live in a ridiculously individualistic society, don't we? Most of the world isn't like this. Africa, Asia, they live in a much more connected society. So if you put that picture on the screen in Asia, for example, and ask children in a room, is that lad in red happy or sad? They say sad. Yeah. We wouldn't say that, would we? But the concept of someone being happy when they're surrounded by misery just isn't in their psyche. How different are we? If we're happy, oh, sod everyone else. That's the way most of the people in the UK live, isn't it? How different would it be if I can't really be happy and fulfilled unless I'm surrounded by equally happy and fulfilled people? We just don't have those connections. I think COVID probably helped move us forward in this direction, and we understood some of the interconnections between ours and different parts of the world. If a virus can spread from a fish market in Wuhan and impact the whole world in a matter of months, that just shows how connected we are. And the way we run our businesses impacts people in different supply chains and networks all over the world. But we've lived as if that's not true. The best illustration of that is when a friend of mine, who's a supplier, actually, a dairy farmer from Wales, hard-nosed dairy farmer, been doing it for 45 years, came with me to the orphanage in Kenya. And after a couple of days, we were sat in our hut, mud hut, no electricity, solar light had run out, so we're having this conversation in the dark. And he said to me, "Paul, thank you for changing my life." What? What are you talking about, Lawrence? He said, "No, the last 2 days, I've been changed. I've never met people who have nothing, and it's changed me." He was, as a human being, connecting with other humans who were, in effect, like him, but in many, many ways, very different to him. And that was a powerful moment for him and also for me. And I've taken many people over there since, and it's as joyful to see the change in others as I take them to a community where people have absolutely nothing. And for a start, they're really, really happy. but they have nothing. And, sometimes we don't know how lucky we are, do we? So we had an opportunity a couple of years ago to put this into practice. Brand new business. We employed 60 new people to work in a food hall and restaurant. And so the challenge for me was, can we start this again with love and connection and being real human beings with a load of people who've never worked for us before? And the answer was yes. Kind of surprisingly. I didn't think it would be as easy as it was. But a lot of people who work there are quite young, and they absolutely get this. They get the fact that business is a community, actually. For many people, it's their community. Sadly, it probably shouldn't be the way, but Gunnercooke is a community, one of the communities you live in your day-to-day lives. After I think it was about 9 months, 2 people came we had a party, Christmas party, except it was delayed due to COVID. It was at Easter, actually. And 2 people, 2 of the older people, which unusually, there was a lady who was in her 50s and a guy who was in their 40s. They both came to me and said they'd never worked anywhere before where they look forward to getting up for work in the morning. How exciting is that? That we can create workplaces where people are having an experience like that. And it's actually quite sad that they'd spent 30 or 40 years working and hadn't experienced that. But we can change it, can't we? Secondly, connecting with nature. And we really have a long way to go here. I have a long way to go here. And for me, it started with this slide. I put this slide up at a Chamber of Commerce meeting I was talking the 3 Ps, people, planet, profit. And I put this slide up and just started weeping at the front. For about 2 minutes, I was crying. And I didn't really have a clue what was going on. But reflecting later, what was going on for me was we hear all the facts about climate change, don't we? We hear all the stats. It's in the news most days these days. But it doesn't connect with our reality. And for the first time, I realized that our impacts in the West as businesses over the last 200 years has actually killed people, is killing people in the world. 200,000 people in Bangladesh are made homeless every single year. More people die every year, in fact 6 times more people die every year due to air pollution than died in the whole of the COVID pandemic. And we have people in London complaining about the expansion of ULEZ. No further comments on that. But connecting with nature. We, as a leadership team, we have our meetings sometimes outside. This was actually our meeting, an away day we had as our leadership team only 2 weeks ago, and we spent some time there in that very spot. We need to connect to nature. I know Daryl's very strong on mentoring. My coach lives in some woods, 40 acres of woods. He does have a small house there, but he spends all his time in the woodland. That's where he does his coaching. So I go there, I sleep there overnight, and I learn about leadership. I learn about life through being in nature. But we can't connect with people, we can't connect with nature unless we connect with ourselves. And I know for me, for most of my leadership journey, I was a doing leader. The last few years, I've been more of a being leader. It's a Western illness. We run around like headless chickens. It's all about productivity. It's all about what we can get done in the shortest amount of time. How many of us actually take time to step back and reflect and spend time in silence and solitude? 2 of the leadership qualities in the 4th bottom line, which is this stuff. I've got a chapter on silence and a chapter on solitude, because that is essential. If you're going to be a proper human being, you need time on your own. Turn off your phone and get on your own. And we do that in our work too. Our meetings quite often start with a period of meditation or silence. And it helps us connect as individuals with ourselves. You see, most of business has been purely on the left-hand side of this quadrant. It's been generally people in suits coming up with great plans to do stuff, and then less important people doing the stuff. Entirely over here. Mind, strategy, activity. But if we're going to have proper organizations, we need to be over here. We need to engage our people's emotions. We need to engage our people's souls, if we're allowed to use that word in business. I think we are these days. We need to engage the very essence of our being. And then what we do is so much more powerful. We start here, that's fine. For us, being a B Corp, we intended to be a better company. But if we only stay on this side, we won't achieve much. We need to move over here. We spend a lot of work with our people, helping them realize what their purpose in life is. And hopefully it fits in with what we're doing as a company. Sometimes it doesn't, and they leave, and that's absolutely fine. It's better for us and better for them. Crying is okay in our workplace. In fact, a couple of times we've had to abandon meetings because there were too many people crying and restart again. One of them was around the Russian invasion of Ukraine, actually. We had a Russian customer at the time we had to pull the plug on. But it's okay for people to have their whole self come to work. In the past, we've encouraged people, stiff upper lip, let's not see the real person. You have much better businesses. Gunnercooke will be better when people are free to express their emotions. Laughter, crying, everything. We've had half human beings that were in the workplace. We need whole human beings if we're really going to make a difference. Now, if that sounds like hard work, some of it is, actually, and it gets a bit messy sometimes, but you end up in a better place. But we have this thing in the West that giving away to others, giving away to people, sacrificing ourselves, making difficult decisions about climate is somehow painful. But that's not true. Some philosophy from Japan, some of you may have heard of this, Ikigai, which simply means happiness, fulfillment. And it comes from the island of Okinawa. More people live to over 100 in Okinawa than anywhere else in the world. And this is what they believe there. And it was particularly pleasing that my first book, Forces for Good, was printed in Japanese earlier this year. So very pleased to be exporting back to Japan what they gave to us. So 4 things. Doing something you love, something you're good at, getting paid for it, which is always handy, but doing something the world needs. That's the one we quite often miss out on. And true fulfillment, true happiness is actually when we're giving away to our fellow human beings. It's a bit of a paradox. We've been taught that actually look after number one, but that's not where fulfillment and happiness comes from. It's doing something the world needs. That's when we're truly fulfilled, truly happy. To finish with a quote from Nelson Mandela, one of my all-time favorite leaders. What counts is not the mere fact we've lived, it's what difference we've made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead. There's a question that I often ask in interviews, and I very rarely have good answers to this. It's who has most inspired you in your work life? And you get some ridiculous answers. Richard Branson is probably the commonest answer. Have you ever met Richard? No. Okay. Very few people come up with it, have had someone inspiring them. How sad is that? But how exciting for us. We could be those people that inspire others in the workplace. And how do we do that? Well, I believe it's through love, really. It's through love for others, it's through love for the planet, and it's by the kind of leadership that puts ourselves second and puts others first. Are you going to be one of those inspiring leaders, inspiring people in the workplace? I hope so. Thank you very much.